Welcome to the Library of the Mediterranean House of Human Sciences in Aix-en-Provence for a new episode of Livres MAM. Livres MAM is a series of interviews run by the Institute of Research and Study on the Arab and Islamic Worlds, IREMAM, a research center affiliated with CNRS and Aix-Marseille University. I am Thomas Pierret, a researcher at IREMAM. On this episode, we're speaking with Eylaf Bader Eddin, a tenure-track assistant professor at Davidson College, North Carolina, Department of Arab Studies. Our guest is also a recipient of the Sadiq Jalal Al-Azam Memorial Award for Cultural Research from the Ittijahat Foundation. We are particularly happy to host Eylaf today because he earned his PhD at our university here in Aix-Marseille in 2020 as part of a joint supervision with the University of Marburg in Germany. Eylaf Bader Eddin is the author of a new book, Translating the Language of the Syrian Revolution 2011-2012, just published by the Gruyter and available for free in open access on the website of the publisher. In this book, Eylaf Bader Eddin argues that the Syrian Revolution was primarily a revolution in language, a break with the linguistic oppression of the old regime. This break was accompanied by the emergence of new languages, which made it possible to inform, tell, and translate the ongoing events and transformations. Eylaf, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm so happy to be here today with you.
Can you tell us about how you came to this research topic and what drove you to write this book?
Actually, it's a long, short story, or like two main events that happened in my life, to start this book and all this PhD work that lasted for more than 5 years, an additional 2 years to make it as a book as it's published now. The first one, like me, as all Syrians, in 2011, I went to the streets against Assad, and I had a dream in my life that I wanted to be a novelist, and I wanted to write a novel. But I've been waiting all the time for this euphoric moment that will shake me from inside in order to write this novel. So when the revolution took place, I went, as I mentioned now, to the streets like all Syrians, and then I participated in it. And then this was the very inspiring moment for me. So I started to participate in all of the revolutionary activities, and then started to document what I call in this book the language of the revolution, like slogans, why the slogan happened, what was the reaction for what, and what is the context of it, and the layers and the stories and the histories of all of those slogans, graffiti, songs, demonstrations, etc., etc. So this was the first part of my the reason why I started working on this book. But then later, unintentionally, I found out that this list that I did in 2011 is kind of a data that can be used later. However, after I left to France at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, and then I started to, my MA supervisor told me, maybe you can write about the language of the revolution, some slogans you have collected there, and then try to translate them. And this is how it started in my MA, and then it developed to be about the translation of the Syrian Revolution, or how to translate the language of the Syrian Revolution 2011. This was how maybe in general, about the data, how it was collected, how the idea came to my mind. But however, I still remember a very small story which explains all of the book, or what is it about. Which is the story I start in the introduction about it, about the slogan "Yil'an Rohak ya Hafiz," or Hafiz curse his soul. When I was working as an interpreter, in Beirut, to one of the foreign journalists, I was telling her about what was happening. I was interpreting for an activist actually there. And he was saying that we were in Banyas, we were gathered, and then we were demonstrating, and then suddenly, with a lot of enthusiasm, he was speaking to her, that we cried out, "Yil'an Rohak ya Hafiz." Me, I was trying to interpret all of this enthusiastic, aspects of his speech at that time. But for her, she told me, yes, it's fine, continue. But, you know, يلعن روحك يا حافظ, this slogan, it has like a lot of layers, a lot of meanings. And the journalist like didn't get it. Why? What does it mean? Why are you waiting me for a reaction? And then I repeated to her all of the story once again. And then she like nodded with her head, yeah, continue. And then I told her, haven't you noticed that I said Hafiz? You know, we are now, Hafiz passed away 2000, you know, and we're mentioning him again. And this actually raised her curiosity. And then she started to ask more and more questions. Why Hafiz? Why Yil'an? You know, cursing in Syria or in the Islamic world is something like a taboo, and why it's allowed, and all of those questions. And that at that moment, actually, I knew for the first time that interpreting or translating such very simple text is not only like looking for linguistic units to replace between both languages, but it's something like deeper, or what I call it in my book, the thick translation, which is an idea by Kwame Appiah that is developed later, I mean, by Samia Mahrez in her famous book about translating the language of Tahrir. So we cannot translate such types of language like slogans, graffiti, despite they are like 3-4 words, but they have like a lot of thick layers, they have a lot of thick histories, thick contents, and thick meanings.
You are not only interested in the use of language in the revolution, but also in language as a revolution itself. Can you explain what you mean by that?
A revolution politically is a movement that aims at changing a political system. And this is what we have about Syria, that most of the Syria experts, Syria scholars like studied politically. For me, like when I had this collected data I've talked about now, I mean, through my participation in the revolution, and also like as an important thing, me as a Syrian, I saw that there is a new turn in the use of language. I'm talking specifically about 2011, 2012. This is the time frame of all of the book. There was a revolution inside the language, if we can call it. So like new terms, new words, the performances that were like, you know, came like in a very revolutionary way. How people like started to use the cultural identities, the cultural folklore things, you know, inside all of the revolutionary performances that was demonstrated in their performances. This is what I call it, like a revolution in language. Like while the language of the regime with all of it, it was like kind of like a muted language, repeated one, old one, you know, like everything was without a meaning. But this language came as a revolution also, not only as a new language, but also as a language to subvert the old one, which is the meaning of the revolution itself. But this can be like seen in many aspects in the language here. Like if you ask me about what are the characteristics of the revolutionary language you're talking about, I mean, as I said, on the shape and content, on the way of demonstrating, in the performance itself, the types of slogans, the new terms, and many other aspects.
So in your own words, you were part of the Syrian Revolution until November 2012. Can you tell us about your involvement in the revolution, how it ended, and what impact it had on your subsequent research?
I was like all Syrians, let's not say all, most Syrians, or a lot of Syrians who went to the streets when the Arab revolutions visited the area, I mean the Arab region. And I went to the streets like all of them. And as I mentioned in the introduction, that I went to participate, I mean, into my own beliefs and the values of the change for the life of Syrians, and Syrians believing in democracy and the civil state, I mean, regardless of what happened later, but those were like, you know, the main motivations for me to participate. My participation in the revolution itself affected me as a researcher. I mean, I wasn't a researcher at that time. I was starting my graduate studies. When I took all of the data I mentioned for me, I mean, and I went to France in 2000, at the end of 2012, beginning 2013, it was a chance for me to start to improve my academic skills at that time. I mean, going to anthropology, going to improve my fieldwork approaches at the same time, and which gave me like a few years. So I left Syria at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, and then I started my PhD in 2015, which is the book. This period of time, it was a reading period for me to distance myself from the Syrian event itself with all of its complications, and helped me a lot I hate to say this word like as an insider. I mean, I don't like this word insider, outsider, because all the time it is like, we know that we are privileged differently, I mean, as researchers all the time. But this like privileged me in unbelievable way, I mean, to witness the political phenomena of the revolution itself, to know how activists were able to do all of this language, compose it, create it, and do it at the end. So this is how this affected my PhD, my book, my academic career, at all of it, I mean, in my work.
Although you are chiefly concerned with the language of the revolution, your book begins with an analysis of the language of the Assad regime. What is the reason for that choice?
That's right. I mean, this is like one of the things that I talked about, the distance that I was able to create in my research. Like one of the slogans I mentioned now, "Wila an ruhak ya Hafiz," I mean, you know, there are like several slogans. It's not possible to understand them. The aim, before starting the research, was only to have this corpus I had is to analyze it. And it's not possible, I mean, to understand this slogan or many other slogans without going to the past of Syrians and to the past of the Syrian slogans also at the same time. So, "Yil'an Ruhak Ya Hafiz," for example, this is like a slogan that I call it that had developed from the 1970 until it reached 2011. So, and this development will not give us any meaning for it if we don't consider it inside the explanation or of the interpretation of the slogan without going to the past history of it. An example of this, I mean, Assad in the 70s, if we could just like call like very generally and very quickly, but in the book they are put in tables, I mean, about the development of those slogans. How Assad like started to be, you know, a leader, then president, leader, then Amin, prophet, which is like, you know, here a reference for Hadith and Quran, prophet as Prophet Al-Amin Hafiz al-Assad. And then he became Ila al-Abad, you know, forever, which is like similar to God. And also there are other slogans, لم يتبقى لنا إلا أنت, so no one left for us but you, which is like very similar to La ilaha illallah. So, and also like one of the slogans that is a development with the same one that Al-Asad ila al-Abad, you know, oh God, it's time for you now to leave and give your place to Assad. Sardorak, it's time for you. So this is like, you know, this eternity thing of the slogans themselves. It was subverted and destroyed by the revolution, like "Yil'an Ruhak Ya Hafiz," this slogan. So we cannot understand "Yil'an Ruhak Ya Hafiz" without going to all of this history of it. This is like on one side. Another side, in order to understand more than one slogan or types of language of the revolution, we need also to go for all of the language of the regime, which gave me the opportunity also to work about the symbolic violence, discursively, I mean, by the language and how this was used before the revolution and how the revolution was able to break it.
How has this official language been disseminated and what are its main features?
You know, as Lisa Wedin says, that this is the ambiguous domination in her, or even like later with Miriam Cook with the commissioned criticism, or Salwa Ismail with the prison as the cornerstone for governance in Syria. I tried actually to build over all of this, to study like, you know, this language of the regime, and I tried to, through my own ethnographic experience and my personal life studying and working in Syria, living in Syria, to analyze or try to know like, okay, what affected me as a Syrian, you know, building on the literature of all of the scholars I mentioned now for you, that, okay, I've never been arrested in my life before 2011, and I've never had like any physical violence over me also, but what made me so obedient to the Assad regime? And then when I was thinking about the school, I found like different aspects that in my beliefs that I think that maybe they are like responsible about having discursive structural power over Syrians. Like the popular organizations, for example, I mean, this like different ones from the schools to the Ba'ath Party at the end when you become an adult. like a collection of names, and I went into some historical investigation about who made the cult of Assad. I mean, depending also on the previous scholarship, and several other aspects that, in my opinion, that they were trying to dominate the Syrian life, including the visual and the musical domination. I call them like when you go to any Syrian street, and still till now, like you see, the street is immersed with the symbols of Assad or the symbols of Ba'ath, Assad more than the Ba'ath itself. So this was very important to understand it in order to know how the revolution itself was able in 2011 to replace all of those aspects.
And you explained that the language of the regime changed somewhat when Bashar al-Assad succeeded his father in 2000.
When Assad, the son, came to rule Syria, all Syrians were optimistic of the change. And for me, I saw it, the change was mostly on the shape more than on the content itself. And we can see that it's a continuation for the Assad the father discursive violence that was used in Syria. For example, like if we just have a long observation about the regime products or language that was used, we can see it started with the standard Arabic. I mean, as the Ba'ath doctrines, like speaking Fusha all the time. And then how this was before Assad, the father, passed away, I mean, became colloquial, Ammiya. And then how Assad like continued from this side. And we can see that Assad was able to really very cleverly, in a very smart way, build on what the father used before and continue and improve over it with very, for example, like a slogan like "Min habbak," we love you. Like it's a very short one that has a lot of meaning. It's the same thing like al-abad. It's very close to ila al-abad ya hafiz al-Assad, which means like we love you till the end, But here, like min habbak, it's a very colloquial language. There is no fusha inside it. There is no complications in it. And also it was very close to the popular people to understand it, even intellectuals, I mean. So this was very clever, I mean, in the musical content, on the way that visually Assad used it. And also, as I remember, like when the internet started at the campaign of Bashar al-Assad, the first campaign, this is one of the examples, like how the language itself can be used to dominate people. You can have a free internet from all of the hotspots that were provided by Syriatel by only write the password min habbak. Just you write min habbak as a password, and then you can have a free internet. For example, I mean, just you write "we love you, Assad," and then you can have like for some limited period of time, like internet, where internet was not well spread in the country. So this is how the new techniques, new styles, and this was in Damascus, this story, so it wasn't in all of Syria. But this was, like one of the, techniques that Assad, the son, was able to create and also to improve for the symbolic domination and discursive one into Syrians.
Now let's turn to the language of the 2011 revolution. Your book includes a discussion of revolutionary songs, but also of other songs that were composed by regime supporters. And what's really interesting here is that you show how these songs were actually responding to each other.
I needed, to put some frames for myself to study the data I've collected, like with having of hundreds of slogans, hundreds of, let's say, thousands of different types of the revolutionary products. It wasn't possible to find like a way to study them all together with having all of this like very rich corpus. So I decided to see like the interaction between those products, the one, regardless if they are songs, slogans. I mean, I limited them with the songs, the slogans, and graffiti, and many different aspects. And I found out that based on the theory of the symbolic market by Pierre Bourdieu, for example, I mean, how a specific product can be like important for the other members of the society or of the community that we are living in. So a book, for example, كذلك قال الأسد, I mean, that has all of the sayings of Assad. It has like a very high importance, symbolic importance for Syrians, because it can be a key to have some privileges if you know it, or if you have it, or if you show it in your office. The same thing with the songs, I mean. Like all of the songs, political songs, they were reacting from the side of the revolution or from the other side of the regime in a very critical way that gives us like a specific understanding for why this song was put here, why this song, like a song like من حبك, for example. Another song after 2011 said ما من حبك, you know, with the same musical composition. So how can we understand the ما من حبك, the revolutionary one, with the one من حبك? You know, it's not possible to make this separation.
Perhaps can you translate for non-Arabic speakers?
Yeah, من حبك, we love you. ما من حبك here, ما is a negative negation article, which means we don't love you. I mean, like, you know, very small change or playing of the name of the title of the song itself changed it all. And this game was like played with most of the slogans, most of the graffiti, and most of the songs also at the same time. So how a specific song for the revolution like is subverted by the regime or vice versa.
The repertoire of contention of Syrian revolutionaries also included what you call visual occupation.
One of the aspects of Assad's domination was immersing Syrians with visualities, with visual items and products itself. And I've noticed that one of the techniques that activists used in Syria in 2011 was to destroy all of the visual domination of Assad that Syrians were immersed with, or let's say not immersed here in this sense, occupied with. On the streets, everywhere, in the offices, governmental organs, I mean, you can see like Assad symbols, I mean, no matter what they are. So this is what I mean by the occupation. But after 2011, all of this was changed. It was changed in several ways. It was changed by the graffiti itself, by changing the names of the streets, the names of the public sectors, all of it. I mean, the schools, the squares, everything you can see like in the new revolutionary cities was changed with the photos, with the visual items on it. So this is how it's occupation, but it's also at the same time liberating this occupation by the symbols of Assad.
You zoom in on several terms that entered the Syrian everyday language after the revolution. And of course, it's not the place here to mention them all, but I'd like you, for instance, to explain the significance of terms like tansiqiya and mundassun.
One of the revolutionary techniques that we started talking about that Syrians, like, they created a new coin, they coined new terms actually. And I've mentioned several words, I mean, they're not all of them, but just like some examples in the book, definitely. And one of this is tansiqiya. I mean, for me, like, it was like a big investigation to me to know where this word came from, I mean, tansiqiya. And also as a practice I did in all of the book was like to translate those terms and the slogans also at the same time. So I don't have the final answer at the end, I mean, because I believe in the plurality of the meanings itself, and such terms no one knows how they started. But I was able to reach like the first tansiqiya, and I was able like to interview some activists who started the first tansiqiya and some activists who were able like to give me some answers. But at the end, it's not possible to have like the last meaning. What does it mean, tansiqiya? Or you can have different interpretations for it.
Yeah. Can you just at least briefly explain for people who have no idea what the tansiqiya is?
Tansiqiya is a coordination. This is a literal translation, if we can like call it like this, which is, I call it a political group, a political organization that started to be like geographically controlling here, like on the level of covering the news and also politically organizing activities in Syria in 2011. They were famous that each tansiqiya had a Facebook page, for example. And because of the closed media of Assad, and there was no other ways to know what is happening in ABCD area, you don't know, and there is no way like to know. So those activists who were on the field itself, they were like saying, today 2 people passed away, today 3 demonstrations happened here and there. So this idea, I mean, between mixing of the virtual activism itself and but also in the field activism, like opened like a new space for Syrians to work. So tansiqiya, as I went for it, I mean, I had like different layers for its meaning, as I said, like the interviews one, the field work, but also on the language. Tansiqiya from nasaqa, what does it mean to coordinate, to organize and do, etc., etc., etc. The other word is mundassun, and mundassun like came to life after the speech of Assad. Infiltrators, I mean, in English, it means that those people who are able secretly to go into the unity of the people and which is like also a subversive act that made by the people against the regime at that period of time. Mundas, it's a very negative word, which means, the person who's trying to break the unity of the people. So is coming like secretly into the unity and tries like from the internally to divide them. So Assad said that a lot of Syrians are now mundasun, mundas. So the revolutionary discourse itself took it from all of its negativity and it changed it to be subverted to be like a very positive term itself. So it's proud to be mundas at the end, because mundas, it doesn't have the meaning of Assad that mentioned negatively, but it means we are the people who would like to have freedom and democracy and the other values.
Much like revolutionary and pro-regime songs, slogans created by the two sides often responded to each other. Can you also give a few examples of that?
There are a lot of slogans that they tried to compete, all the time. For example, like the same example I mentioned, Al-Asad ila al-Abad, this was made by the regime itself, and then the revolutionary part said that يلعن روحك يا حافظ, for example, and then like in several versions of it, like it started to have, or من حبك, like ما من حبك, changing the language itself. But at the same time, this was not only from it wasn't only the revolution responding to the regime or the supporters of the regime, but it was also differently. For example, Al-Ashush, who was called Al-Ashush in 2011, and Yalla Arhal Ya Bashar. Bashar, it's your time to leave now. It was changed.
Maybe some people don't know who Al-Ashush was.
Al-Ashush, he is one of the singers of the demonstrations. He was in Hama. There was a rumor about him that he was killed, and then a few years ago there was an investigation by an English medialet that said he was not killed. So this is why I talked about claimed Kashush, here. And he became like very famous because he was killed, as we thought at that time. Regardless about the story, it has like a lot of layers. So this song that was very famous, Yalla Arhal Ya Bashar, we find out that few weeks after, at the same song with the same rhythm, musical rhythm, نحن رجالك يا بشار, we are your men, Bashar. And then it continues the same way. So, we have this subversive acts, between the regime supporters and the revolution supporters all the time on the level of slogans.
You also illustrate that phenomenon with graffitis, where revolutionaries and regime supporters attempt to subvert each other.
The war was not only like about arresting activists or about destroying cities, villages, etc., but also it was about destroying the visuality, because usually when a demonstration took place in a city, they changed the names of the schools, the names of hospitals, the names of the streets, and they put like banners, this is the street of that, or the street of the revolution, the street of dignity, or etc., etc. So when the army, and also with a lot of graffiti, revolutionary graffiti, when the army used to go into a city with peaceful demonstrators where there were like no military at that time, I'm talking about the first few months or the first year, just for the audience to know, they just like cleaned all of the walls, painted them on white, and like written over the clean walls like من هنا مروا جنود الأسد. From here, the Assad's men passed. And this is how, they cleaned all of the visual occupation here, I call it like, or the liberation of the revolutionary, and then it was replaced by the Assad's supporters or the one of the militaries. So a change of it was, marru in Arabic is mim, ra, waw, alif. If the mim, you put a dot over it, then it would be farru, ran away. So all of this playing was like taking place. This is an example about how this, they do it. Or another example, like there was like a very famous slogan, Al-Asad aw la ahad. And they saw it like one documented it like saying, سنحرق الأسد, Al-Asad aw la ahad, Asad or no one. This is the translation of it. So one of the documented slogans that Al-Asad, and they put like سنحرق الأسد, you know, and then they said وَنَبْنِي الْبَلَد.
So meaning we will burn Assad to rebuild the country, right?
You know, so this is like subverting the graffiti itself between the revolution and both sides.
So in the second part of the book, you look at publications that aim to translate Syrian textual and visual revolutionary productions in English, hence for a Western audience. Could you first present the books you selected for your case study?
With all of now the introduction, we talked about the layers of the meanings, the thick meanings, the complication that we may face to understand, you know, those products of the revolution. I've been thinking, and this is like, you know, the aim of the book is to translate them and to see how the translation of them. So I went into checking which books translated the revolutionary language. And then I went to the context of the translation market. And then I decided to take it from the sociology of translation to Giselle Sapiro and how the translation market works. So I went into like making my own statistics in the translation market in general. I mean, creating my own list of also what was translated, when, what time, by whom. And then I found out, like, for this period of time, there were only 3 books translated the language of the Syrian Revolution. And they are the one of Samar Yazbek, تقاطع النيران, A Woman in Crossfire, Syria Speaks, سوريا تتحدث, and قصة مكان قصة إنسان for the creative memory of the Syrian Revolution. Those are the books that they only translated them. And I considered like here translation as an act of import and export. I mean, in the terms of sociology of translation, who's importing a translation and who's exporting a translation from the periphery and a translation from the center. And we know what does it mean, like center and periphery. Periphery is Syria and center is here the West, or the English-speaking audience or readership here itself. Yeah, this is maybe I will talk later about how they were translated.
I'd like you to speak about the main differences you have identified between the English translations and the Arabic version, and how they compare with more grassroots attempts at translating the language of the revolution.
The translation, as I divided it into 2 parts, I mean, the first one is the center translation, when the center that appointed like some books to be translated about the revolution or the language of the revolution. And the second one is the activist translation, which is like made by activists themselves from Syria to translate. There are like really several examples in the book. I mean, mentioning about maybe I can like talk only. I'm thinking about which examples I should bring. I mean, maybe I can mention Syria Speaks, for example. I mean, this book, we can see like there was like a specific focus on the Islamization or violence of the revolution by deleting something from Arabic into English. Give you an example of this. There is an example, says in the introduction, as I remember, بين صديقي للطفولة ينتميان إلى طائفتين مختلفتين. Literally translated, between 2 friendship bodies belonging to different sects, without saying who are they. In the translation, it says between Alawi Sunni friends. You know, like this is, you know, an explanation about
Alawite
and Sunnite. Yeah, this is how it says, like in the translation. This is one of the examples. Another example, like it says, لتحقيق أهدافهم الكرامة والحرية والعدالة. It's something like this, I forgot. In the English it says, it deletes حرية عدالة كرامة, dignity, justice and freedom, and then they say instead of a gun, instead of holding the gun. And here, like we see, like, you know, the insertion of violence and deleting the pacifist, peaceful words that the revolution believed in. And many several examples, I mean, in the book. You can maybe like we make the audience eager to read it by not telling everything, as long as it's open access.
My last question is about the appendices in the book, which are quite long and very rich. You've brought a lot of data in it.
Actually, one of the things we can see, I mean, on studying Syria, and Pierre, you are a Syria expert, you know this, we have like lack of data. And this is like one of the problems, I believe, that why we have also lack of research on Syria, politically or culturally. But culturally, we have like more lack than the political, because political sciences or political scientists, they have easier way maybe like to only make interviews or having the data. But the question for me all the time was why the Egyptian and the Tunisian revolution were more studied culturally than the Syrian one. And if we look now at the Syrian, I mean, you know, talking about like in the time frame till 2020, maybe now there are like few researchers definitely about the revolution itself. I was thinking about what if a researcher, an MS student, a PhD student would like to do something about slogans, for example. If, you know, how would she be able to do it without being able, you know, to go to the fieldwork itself, without having, you know, a lot of archives online. So one of the aim of the book is to add a lot of lists, very long lists, I mean, of slogans, the development of slogans, graffiti also, songs also, put them to have open access for them to all of the researchers, people who are interested in studying Syria. So it might be like an important place where they can like start new researches. I mean, as a researcher, this is what I hope. And this was empowered also with cooperation with الذاكرة الإبداعية للثورة السورية, the creative memory, without the creative memory of the Syrian Revolution, by Sana Yazaji, who's the leader of the team, where I created, this is only an example of the data that I have, like 324 songs for only 1 year. And all of those songs were like collected from YouTube and documented and downloaded at the same time. Very big part of them are deleted now because, you know, the policies of YouTube. And then I was so sorry about like having this data and then not being able to give it to researchers or people or Syrians even. Like, so there was a cooperation between me and the creative memory, and they hosted all of this data. So now if you go to the book, you will see a link, you click on the link, and then you're able not only to read the analysis of the songs and read them and see the data, but also you can listen to them there ready. So this was, you know, trying to give all of the data I've collected to Syrians, but also to the people who are interested in Syria and Syrian studies, hoping that more research culturally will be flourishing, inshallah, in the future.
This episode of Livres MAM is now over. I was speaking with Eylaf Bader Eddin about his book, Translating the Language of the Syrian Revolution 2011-2012, published in 2024 by the Gruyter and available online, open access. You can watch this interview on the YouTube channel of IREMAM and listen to it as a podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for joining us today.